the light that burns too bright. There's a kind of woman you don't meet every day, the one who sees life through layers most people never notice. Her presence carries calm, yet her eyes hold storms. She speaks with a softness that feels like truth, but beneath that peace, there's a fire, the kind of fire that can either illuminate or consume. These are the women with high spiritual intelligence, deeply aware, intuitively gifted, able to sense the undercurrents of life. But as Carl Jung warned, every light casts a shadow. And when a woman's soul burns this brightly, the shadows it creates can be just as powerful and dangerous. This isn't about bad women or moral failings. It's about what happens when spiritual depth isn't grounded. Jung psychology reminds us that enlightenment isn't light alone, it's the integration of darkness. The very gifts that make her extraordinary can turn volatile when the ego tries to wear the divine like a crown. So, this is not a warning against spiritual intelligence, it's a mirror. It's an invitation to see what Jung saw in all seekers of wisdom, that the greater the power within, the greater the need for self-awareness. These are the dangerous signs of women with high spiritual intelligence, not to condemn, but to protect the integrity of the gift itself. Carl Jung, mapping the soul's terrain. Carl Jung didn't simply study the mind, he ventured into its hidden kingdoms. He believed that the psyche wasn't just thoughts and behaviors, but a vast living landscape of symbols, instincts, and ancient patterns. He called these patterns archetypes, and they govern the myths we live out: the healer, the mother, the lover, the sage. Within each person, these forces rise and fall like tides, shaping how we love, believe, create, and suffer. For Jung, the shadow was central, the repressed, unlived, denied parts of ourselves. The things we don't want to see, we bury. But buried doesn't mean gone. The shadow acts out in disguise, often through projection or moral superiority. The more spiritual we become, the more seductive the illusion that I have transcended all that. But Jung warned, the higher you climb, the longer your shadow becomes. The divine and the dangerous evolve together. He also spoke of individuation, the lifelong process of integrating all aspects of the self, light and dark alike, into harmony. This is the soul's real work. When that process is rushed or unbalanced, when someone identifies with archetypes like the priestess, healer, or prophet without grounding in humility, spiritual intelligence turns into spiritual inflation. And that's where our story begins. What is spiritual intelligence? Spiritual intelligence isn't about religion or dogma. It's the ability to perceive life beyond surface appearances, to sense meaning in chaos, to feel the sacred in the ordinary. A spiritually intelligent woman doesn't just know things, she understands them, intuitively. Her empathy is deep, her wisdom often feels ancient. She can sense energy, read emotions, and comfort without words. She's the kind of person others seek when life breaks them open. But this intelligence isn't without cost. Being tuned into subtle realms often means feeling more, too much, sometimes. These women walk a thin line between enlightenment and exhaustion. They're vulnerable to psychic overload, to mistaking intuition for infallibility, to being pulled by unconscious forces they can't name. Jung would say such a woman lives closer to the unconscious, and the unconscious is both divine and dangerous. Jung would say such a woman lives closer to the unconscious, and the unconscious is both divine and dangerous. The key, Jung taught, is integration, not escaping the human for the spiritual, but uniting them. The spiritually intelligent woman's challenge is not to reject her gifts, but to root them. Without grounding, her empathy becomes absorption, her insight becomes arrogance, and her openness becomes exposure. Intersection, spiritual intelligence through a Jungian lens. When viewed through Jung's eyes, spiritual intelligence looks a lot like a deep dialogue with the unconscious. Dreams, synchronicities, intuition, these are ways the self communicates. Jung saw the self as the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious, human and divine. When a woman's spiritual intelligence is high, she's in closer conversation with that self. But the risk is mistaking that voice for her own ego. That's where the shadow slips in. The danger, Jung might say, is ego identification with the self, when someone confuses their personal identity with the voice of the divine within. This is spiritual inflation. Instead of being guided by the self, she becomes possessed by it. She may feel the chosen, special, or beyond human error. The greater her light, the more seductive that illusion becomes. In Jungian terms, this is not evil, it's imbalance. The unconscious has taken over consciousness. The woman doesn't realize she's living an archetype, not a personal truth. Without awareness, spiritual intelligence becomes spiritual intoxication, the wine of the gods poured into a human vessel too fragile to hold it. 1. Psychic inflation and archetypal possession. Psychic inflation happens when a person identifies with something larger than themselves, an archetype, a spiritual role, a sense of divine mission. Jung described it as the ego being possessed by the unconscious. For a woman with high spiritual intelligence, this can show up subtly, a belief that she has transcended the ordinary, that her feelings are intuitively correct, that her insights are revelations rather than reflections. It might start innocently, an intuitive hit that turns out right, a healing moment that moves others, a sudden sense of connection to something divine. But the ego is quick to claim ownership. Soon, she's not just a seeker, she's a channel, a chosen vessel. Her humility quietly evaporates, replaced by spiritual authority. Jung warned that such identification leads to the inflation of the ego by archetypal energy, and when the ego swells, it eventually bursts. The danger here is subtle but severe. She may begin to manipulate under the banner of wisdom, dismiss criticism as low vibration, or isolate herself from those who don't understand. When a human ego wears the mask of the divine, it loses its humanity, and with it, compassion. As Jung said, the gods have become diseases. When divine energy possesses the ego, it no longer enlightens, it consumes. 2. Overfusion with the persona mask. The persona is the mask we wear to fit into society, the role we play to be accepted. It's not false by nature, it's functional. But when a woman fuses with her persona, she forgets who she is beneath it. For a spiritually intelligent woman, this often means she begins to perform spirituality. Always calm. Always kind. Always wise. Never messy, never angry, never unsure. On the surface, it looks admirable, serenity personified. But inside, it's suffocating. The more she hides her rawness to maintain her image, the more disconnected she becomes from her true self. Jung would call this the tyranny of the persona, the soul trapped beneath its own performance. She becomes an actor in her own life, terrified that authenticity might shatter her spiritual identity. The consequence? Emotional repression, exhaustion, and often a secret sense of hollowness. The persona's perfection becomes a prison. Jung urged that true individuation means dropping the mask, letting the soul breathe through the cracks. Because what makes a woman spiritually powerful isn't that she's flawless, it's that she's whole. 3. Shadow repression and projection. The shadow is everything a person refuses to see in themselves: the jealousy, rage, selfishness, vanity, the impulses that don't match the image they wish to uphold. For women with high spiritual intelligence, the shadow is often sophisticated. It hides behind light. It whispers, "You're above that." When anger arises, it's labeled negative energy. When envy surfaces, it's rebranded as low vibration. But Jung warned, what we repress doesn't disappear, it returns in disguise. A spiritually intelligent woman may project her hidden darkness onto others, calling them toxic, ego-driven, or unhealed, unaware that she's describing her own reflection. This projection can create deep fractures in relationships. People around her start to feel subtly judged, walked over, or dismissed under the weight of her righteousness. She may preach compassion while quietly condemning. Jung wrote that the brighter the conscious light, the darker the shadow becomes, and when that shadow is denied, it takes control from below. The moment a woman becomes convinced that her light is pure, she stops looking inward. That's when the shadow grows teeth. But there's a paradox here. The same woman who represses her shadow often does so because she genuinely wants to do good, to help, to heal, to be kind. The danger lies in confusing being good with being whole. Jung taught that wholeness includes both the saint and the sinner within us. When a spiritually intelligent woman finds the courage to face her shadow, to say, "Yes, that darkness is mine too," she doesn't lose her light. She makes it real. 4. Over-openness without boundaries. To be spiritually intelligent is to be open to energy, to intuition, to the emotions of others. It's what makes these women extraordinary empaths. They feel the world like weather. But without boundaries, this openness becomes a flood. Jung often warned that an unguarded psyche can be swept away by the collective unconscious, that vast sea of others' emotions, fears, and archetypal energies. For an ungrounded empath, this can mean losing her sense of self completely. She might absorb pain that isn't hers, feel drained without understanding why, or confuse compassion with self-erasure. Her gift becomes a burden. She gives endlessly, listens endlessly, heals endlessly, until one day, she's empty. Spiritual exhaustion often masquerades as depression or apathy, but underneath it lies psychic saturation. Jung would say she's merged too much with the unconscious field around her, her individuality blurred by collective pain. Boundaries are not walls, they are sacred containers. They protect the integrity of the soul. A truly wise woman doesn't open to everything, she discerns. She knows that even love requires limits, and that saying no I can be an act of spiritual maturity. Jung saw individuation as developing a strong enough ego to stand firm in the face of the unconscious. For the empath, that means remembering this truth: you are not the healer because you absorb pain, you are the healer because you transform it without losing yourself. 5. Moral absolutism and the illusion of purity. One of the most seductive traps of high spiritual intelligence is moral absolutism, the belief that one has ascended above moral gray zones. Jung recognized this as a defense against inner conflict. The psyche, uncomfortable with ambiguity, takes refuge in righteousness. A woman who once sought understanding now seeks purity. Her spirituality becomes a moral fortress. Every action must align with her ideals, every deviation feels like sin. At first, this may look like discipline, clean living, devotion, ethics. But soon, it morphs into rigidity. She may begin to judge others harshly, using spirituality as the new standard of purity. Jung called this ego inflation through moralism, when the ego hides its insecurity behind virtue. The tragedy is that in her effort to be perfect, she distances herself from the human condition she was meant to love and understand. Real spirituality, Jung would remind us, thrives in paradox. True goodness isn't sterile, it's alive, messy, compassionate. The woman who learns to embrace imperfection reclaims her humanity. The more she releases the need to be pure, the more she actually embodies grace. Because enlightenment isn't moral superiority, it's radical empathy for everything human. 6. Detachment from earthly life. When spiritual awareness deepens, material life can begin to feel trivial. Bills, routines, arguments, they seem small compared to cosmic truth. Many spiritually intelligent women start to withdraw, floating between worlds. They live more in intuition than action, more in vision than presence. Jung called this the problem of one-sidedness, when the psyche over-identifies with one realm of experience, neglecting the rest. This detachment can appear peaceful at first. She meditates, reflects, contemplates. But slowly, her roots loosen. She might stop taking care of her body, forget basic needs, or lose interest in worldly responsibility. Relationships strain. The physical world becomes something she endures rather than inhabits. Jung believed that the soul incarnated to unite spirit and matter, not to escape one for the other. Spirit without earth is illusion, earth without spirit is despair. To be truly whole, she must come back down. To feel hunger and still pray. To wash dishes and still sense eternity. Jung might say the divine wants to live through her humanness, not instead of it. When she grounds her spirituality in real life, in touch, love, work, laughter, she embodies the alchemy of the self, heaven brought to earth. 7. Spiritual bypassing disguised as peace. Many women with deep spiritual intelligence mistake emotional numbness for enlightenment. They tell themselves they've transcended pain when in truth, they've simply detached from it. Jung called this the spiritual bypass long before the term existed, using lofty ideals to avoid unresolved wounds. The bypass feels like serenity, but it's really suppression dressed in light. She might say, "I don't feel anger anymore," or "I've forgiven everyone," while her body trembles with tension she can't explain. Her calm becomes armor. Jung would note that this is the ego's clever attempt to protect itself from the raw chaos of emotion. But what is not felt cannot be healed. The unconscious stores it like an unpaid debt, waiting for the moment it must be faced. Healing, Jung insisted, isn't sterile, it's alive, even messy. Real peace isn't the absence of pain, but the integration of it. When a spiritually intelligent woman allows herself to feel again, to grieve, to rage, to love without control, she returns to life. And that return, Jung would say, is where the true self begins to speak. 8. The savior complex. Another danger Jung identified is the savior complex, the compulsion to rescue others, born not from compassion but from an unconscious need to validate one's worth. For a spiritually gifted woman, this can be intoxicating. Her insight and empathy attract the broken, helping them gives her purpose. But soon, she becomes trapped in the role of the healer. Her identity depends on others needing saving. This pattern drains her energy and distorts her relationships. She might unconsciously choose partners or friends who are perpetually wounded, ensuring her role remains secure. Jung would say the archetype of the healer has possessed her. The ego confuses service with salvation, as if carrying others' pain could prove her divinity. But the real motive isn't love, it's fear of her own emptiness when she's not fixing someone else. Liberation begins when she realizes she's not the savior, she's a mirror. Healing flows through her, not from her. When she steps back, others discover their own strength. And she, finally, finds peace not in rescuing, but in simply being whole and human. Integration, the path toward wholeness. Jung's answer to all these dangers was not suppression, but integration. He saw the soul as a vast system seeking balance, light and dark, masculine and feminine, heaven and earth. A woman with high spiritual intelligence must learn to become a bridge between these worlds, not a refugee from either. Integration means honoring her intuition and her logic, her compassion and her boundaries, her divinity and her flaws. The journey is long. It involves shadow work, looking unflinchingly at the parts of herself she'd rather hide. It involves humility, admitting she doesn't know, even when she feels she should. It involves grounding, walking barefoot on earth after nights spent among the stars. Jung believed that individuation was the sacred marriage of opposites within. When she integrates her contradictions, she stops performing spirituality and starts embodying it. True spiritual intelligence, Jung might say, is not light without shadow, it's light that has made peace with its shadow. The woman who achieves this no longer radiates perfection, she radiates presence. She becomes what Jung called the self-realized, not divine above humanity, but divine within humanity. Conclusion: the fire and the ground. In the end, the most spiritually intelligent women are not the ones who shine the brightest, but the ones who balance the flame. They've seen both their heaven and their hell and learned to walk between them with grace. They know that enlightenment isn't the escape from darkness, but the courage to carry light into it. They have stopped striving to be perfect and started choosing to be whole. Jung taught that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The woman who understands this truth becomes indestructible. Her power is not fragile, it's forged. Her faith is not naive, it's earned. She has danced with her demons and befriended them. She no longer fears the shadow, she teaches others how to live with it. So if you are that woman, or becoming her, remember this: your spiritual intelligence is both your gift and your test. The light in you is sacred, but it must stay human. Because it's not divinity that makes you powerful, it's your willingness to be real. And in that realness lies the most profound kind of enlightenment, one that doesn't burn you, but warms the world.